Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel where today we are going to be doing a full-length, non-spoilery review of The Bright Sessions, seasons 1 and 2. So, The Bright Sessions is a science fiction podcast that was created and written by Lauren Shippen and produced by Atypical Artists. And in this particular podcast, we are following Dr. Bright. And Dr. Bright is a therapist, and we are listening to her recorded sessions with her patients. It becomes clear very, very quickly that these patients have some very unusual abilities, superpowers, if you will. And Dr. Bright is there to help them understand what is going on, as well as helping them learn how to deal with these abilities so that they can live their best life. And everything kind of goes from there. So, just some real quick logistical information. Season 1 is 9 episodes long, Season 2 is 19 episodes long, and additionally, there are 2 extra episodes that were released in the hiatus between seasons 2 and 3. Each episode is generally between 15 and 25 minutes long. Obviously, there is some variation there, some episodes outside of that, but generally 15 to 25 minutes long. And most of them, honestly, are around like 16 to 18 minutes long. And there are definitely some content warnings for this podcast. This is not an exhaustive list, it is just what I happen to notice, but there are content warnings for bullying as well as reliving a traumatic parental death and reliving some war situations as well. So, again, not an exhaustive list, just what I happened to notice. So, let's go ahead and jump right in and start talking about the plot of this particular podcast. And with season 1, what I found is that it is very much a prologue of sorts. Its primary purpose is to set up this world and set up these characters. So it becomes apparent very quickly that, for example, in this world, these people with these superpowers, these atypical abilities exist, but this is not known by the wider general population. So it's not common knowledge that there are people who have these extraordinary abilities. And so this is very interesting in how obviously Dr. Bright tries to find her patients. It's like, okay, well, how do you find those? If you specialize in people with unusual abilities, how do you find those patients? Which is a very interesting topic. But it's also setting up these characters and who they are, what their abilities are, and like what their struggles are and what they're trying to overcome. And I think that this was done really, really well. We are following 3 primary patients, and so we get 3 episodes with each one. And I think that this was just exactly right. It's enough to establish these characters and establish what their storylines are going to look like without being too much extra. We get all the information that we need so that we understand what is going on in season 2. And season 2 is where everything there's an explosion of like interesting storylines and information. So we get some new characters, both new patients as well as some other characters that are important in Dr. Bright's life. We find out more information about the world outside of Dr. Bright's office. So people who know that these atypicals exist and how they are interacting with atypicals. We get to actually see some of these characters interacting with each other. So in the first season, it really was just Dr. Bright in these therapy sessions with her patients, whereas in the second season, we still get those therapy sessions, but we also get to see some of these characters, these patients finding each other and getting to know each other. And it's just really interesting to see that as well. And then, of course, we also find out a lot more about Dr. Bright, who she is as a person and some of her history, and also some of what her motivations in the present day are. And I find all of this to be fascinating. And all of these things are interwoven throughout the various therapy sessions and general recordings from other places. So we do get therapy sessions, we get voicemails, we get people who are like, I'm just, I'm going to record this just for my own purposes so that I can hear what I said. It's all very, very interesting. And most of these episodes are pushing multiple storylines forward in a really, really interesting kind of way. The second season definitely has an overarching plot, which I can't get too much into without actually spoiling things, but it is fascinating. Again, it has to do with Dr. Bright and who she is and what her motivations are. And we leave the second season on a bit of a cliffhanger. It's one of those cliffhangers where you're like, oh, I kind of expect it. It's not the kind of one where it didn't make me mad necessarily. It just made me really, really interested to jump into season 3. But it was, I just honestly, like, it was, season 2 was so good. We got so much really interesting information. I have a feeling in season 3 we're going to get even more interesting information. And I'm really interested to see what that overarching plot is going to be. Additionally, like I said, we have these 2 kind of bonus episodes that were released in the hiatus between seasons 2 and 3. The first one is entitled For Mark, and I do think that this is an important episode to listen to because it is going to establish one of our characters' like thoughts and feelings about what has happened, as well as some of their growth, which I think will be necessary to know for season 3, but it's also setting up some of what's going on in the outside world that, again, we're going to need for season 3. So I would highly recommend listening to For Mark. Now, the other bonus episode is called The Intrusion, and this is a crossover episode with Ars Paradoxica, which is another science fiction podcast. And I don't think that this one is necessary for the overall storyline of the Bright Sessions. So it's one of those things where it's just interesting, and it's especially nice if you have listened to both of these podcasts up to this point. But like ultimately, just that's what it is. It's fun. It's not necessary. I will say that I really did like listening to it, and I'm much more interested in listening to Ars Paradoxica, but yeah, not necessary for the overall storyline. However, if it does turn out, like once I start listening to season 3 of the Bright Sessions, if it turns out that this particular episode is necessary for season 3, I will leave a note down in the description so that you should actually listen to it. And so now we are going to talk about our characters. And obviously one of our main characters is Dr. Bright. And Dr. Bright is voiced by Julia Morizawa. And I think Dr. Bright is fascinating. She is this therapist, and especially in the first season, she very much is closed off, very much in therapist mode of, I'm not bringing any of my stuff to the table. I'm just going to help you with your stuff. There are still hints, obviously, that there are other things going on behind the scenes with Dr. Bright, but it's very much she's closed off. So when we get to the second season, her character kind of breaks open, and we get to see her as much more of a well-rounded person, and it is absolutely fascinating. I will say that sometimes I struggle to connect a little bit with Dr. Bright, and I don't know exactly why. I think, to be fair, part of it is just her character. She is very closed off emotionally, very logical, very much driven by what her goals are, to the point where she's willing to sacrifice some of her own morals. And that's always kind of a character that is a little bit difficult for me to connect with. But sometimes I also found the acting contributed to it. And again, like I'm going to put a big old caveat on this, that I don't know exactly why I struggled with this. I don't know, because I generally think that this character is very well written and generally well acted, but there were times where there were emotional responses that I didn't feel that emotion coming across. And it's like, it could be the writing, it could be the acting, or it could honestly just be because this kind of character is very closed off emotionally, and like how it's being acted absolutely makes sense for the character, and it just doesn't necessarily work for me as well. I don't know. But generally, Dr. Bright is a very fascinating character and a really good facilitator of a lot of these kind of storylines. And then we have our three primary patient characters. So the first one is Sam, and Sam is voiced by Lauren Shippen. Sam is in her mid 20s and she has the ability to time travel. And when she meets Dr. Bright, she is a wreck because basically she's been able to time travel since like puberty. And so it's been going on for a really long time. She is very aware that she is completely different than everybody else. She has never met anybody with an ability like hers or an extra ability at all, nor has she ever met anybody who's ever heard of somebody who has these extra abilities. And so she is incredibly isolated. But not only that, her experience with this ability has been very traumatic to her. She has a lot of anxiety about this difference that she has. And so when she comes to Dr. Bright, she is just a wreck. And I absolutely adore her storyline because that is something that I found to be incredibly relatable. And for to watch Sam go through this experience of having her therapist say, no, you're not crazy. Not only that, but you're not alone. And also, I have some coping mechanisms for you that should help you deal with this ability. Like this, I just related to this so hard. And I absolutely loved watching Sam come to terms with this and really get things under control and see her ability more as a positive rather than a negative. I will say that Lauren Shippen's acting was generally pretty good. There were a couple moments where it felt less like us, the audience, was eavesdropping on a conversation and more like it was actors reading a script. But I didn't find it to like, it pulled me out of the story a little bit, but I didn't find that it was really bad. So it was one of those things where I was mostly frustrated because I was just like, oh, you were so close to being like top notch, but yeah, it wasn't always quite there. Our second patient character is Chloe, and Chloe is voiced by Anna Lore. I think Chloe is fascinating because Chloe is a college student, and she is coming to Dr. Bright, I think, on the recommendation of her mother. But Chloe is a college student, and according to Chloe, she hears angels. Angels talk to her, and it is making her life incredibly difficult to live. Now, I love this storyline as well, simply because, like, I mean, okay, first of all, angels are not talking to Chloe. And so it's up to Dr. Bright to figure out what actually is happening. And again, help Chloe learn what this is, accept it, and figure out some coping mechanisms so that it's not having such a negative effect on her life. But it is fascinating to watch Chloe try to be a college student when she has this whole other huge thing that she doesn't really know how to deal with. And so, again, I find that to be an incredibly relatable storyline. Additionally, I love Chloe's interactions with Dr. Bright, as these are definitely two people who have um, opposite, in some ways, very opposite personalities. Chloe is very much like a high energy, I have an idea and I'm going to pursue it kind of person without, and very much a college student where she thinks that her idea is absolutely correct and she can see some of the pitfalls of like that could potentially happen, but ultimately she thinks that it's going to work out just fine. And Dr. Bright is obviously trying to temper some of that energy and try to get Chloe to stop and think more in depth about those possible pitfalls, while also trying really hard to not quash Chloe's energy and her enthusiasm for doing some of these things. And so I think it's absolutely fascinating to watch their interactions as well. And then the last primary character that we have is Caleb. Caleb is voiced by Brigham Snow. And Caleb is a high school student. And when we meet him, it is very clear that he has been um, seeing Dr. Bright for some amount of time because he is very aware that he is an empath. He is still struggling to get things under control, but he also has some of the tools that he needs to keep his own emotions in check while also dealing with other people's emotions. And I love his storyline. And of course, the more I think about like his situation where he's an empath in high school is like that's nightmare fuel. And so like again, I think that it's very interesting to watch Caleb try to figure out how to deal with it. I think Briggon Snow does a great job with the acting. There were occasionally times where I wanted to reach through my headphones and just shake them and being like, "You're being such a teenager. You are so oblivious. Like, come on now." So I think he did a great job. He's also got this very sweet subplot that I absolutely adored watching, and just generally, I really liked his character as well. I didn't mention it, but Anna Lore as Chloe also did a really great job with the acting. Just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. But like the thing that I love about all of these character arcs and the growth that we get to see with them is that if you have struggled with mental health issues or a mental illness or a neurodivergency, like if you went for a long period of time, especially without being diagnosed, and you didn't have good coping mechanisms, all three of these storylines are incredibly relatable because like these are the times where people like at the end of high school, in college, and like especially late 20s, these are the periods where people find themselves breaking down, where their not great coping mechanisms no longer work and they have to figure out what is going on and what can actually help. So it was really fascinating to watch these storylines and just they're just so incredibly relatable. And I love that. And additionally, with all of these characters, because they are in therapy sessions, we get to see so much of their growth and their reflection on like who they were and where they are now. And it's just, I really love that part of it. It is definitely exactly what I like from my stories. So yeah, clearly I really, really like this particular podcast. I don't have a ton of complaints with it, just occasionally some of the acting, and the acting is not as great as I would like it. And occasionally there are plot threads that I'm not as invested in. I still find them interesting. I'm just not necessarily as invested in them. But I am so looking forward to getting into season 3. So far with this podcast, I would give it a 4.25 stars. So, if you have any thoughts or feelings about anything that I have said for in this review, please leave me a comment down below. But that is all I have. So, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!